Hello everyone and welcome to our webinar. If you would just take one moment please and complete the survey, we would be grateful, and then we can get started. Great. So hello everyone and welcome to our Chapter 3 of our SharePoint webinar series, Data Loss Prevention in SharePoint 2016, Protect Your Sensitive Information. We are happy to have you here and look forward to presenting to you. We are going to post a couple of polls. If you don't mind giving us some feedback, this helps us with really accurately defining what we present on in the future and making sure that we are meeting your needs for these types of webinars and other events that we hold. I will pause for just a couple of minutes for those to be completed, and then we will move on to the webinar. Great. Again, hello and welcome. So just a few things to run through our housekeeping list. We are recording this webinar and it will be sent out to you via a link in the follow-up mail. Q&A will take place at the end of the webinar, but if you do have something in the middle, feel free to place that question in the chat box. All questions we will get to at some point. If you don't feel comfortable asking in front of the group, you are welcome to send those along to us as well, and we'll make sure to get those answered. Okay, so a quick introduction. Today's presenters, we have Solution Architect Michael Trachtenberg, as well as our VP of Business Development, Duncan Smith. I will turn it over to both of them at this moment. Duncan will start off. Thank you.
Thanks, Lindsay. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for taking the time out of your busy schedules to join today's webinar. We're going to talk a little bit today about the latest updates to SharePoint compliance and more specifically data loss prevention in SharePoint. But before I turn it over to my colleague Michael Trachtenberg, I want to just spend a few minutes setting the scene for today's topic. Now I know most of you have probably seen the headlines and maybe a little bit overwhelmed by the numbers, but I think it's fair to say that security is very much top of mind with all the reports and escalating impact that we're seeing in the news on a weekly basis, and certainly the financial impact that these incidences are now imposing upon many corporations, sometimes in the billions, has really brought this I think to the forefront. Interestingly enough, I have a quote here from former CIO of the FBI, which basically acknowledges that either you have been hacked and you know it, or you have been hacked and you don't know it. In other words, cybersecurity should be of concern to everybody because we are all equally vulnerable in today's world. And what really has, I think, sort of, led to some of this is a combination of factors. First and foremost, there's just more data out there now than ever. Think about the increasing amount of email that you get in a personal email that you get in a given day, the amount of documents that you're sharing with colleagues. The move to the cloud, I think, has really also brought in security to the forefront as well, now that more companies are adopting a plethora of SaaS applications. Plus, business itself has changed. Digital transformation is either changing companies and the way that they do business, the way that they interact with their employees and their customers, and also, just the very nature of the business models is being disrupted and changed to a large degree as well. And then, last but not least, there is the ever evolving cat and mouse game. As the technology gets better and more sophisticated, new things come online. Hackers and companies out there who are trying to take advantage are quick to jump on board. And of course, as a result, the security companies need to stay abreast of all those changes and respond ever increasingly in real-time fashion where they can. And I think it's important also to note that, in today's world, given all of these changes and all these challenges, that security is becoming a concern not just for the CIO, certainly upper management, the CEO, but really it should be the concern of everyone across your organization. And to have a really, I think, effective program requires some culture change. It requires people understand the implications of it, and certainly this would likely start from the top. For their part, Microsoft, I think, has made a great commitment in terms of cloud security and implementing policies and controls that in most cases eclipse what our customers are able to do in their on-prem data centers. And of course, Microsoft has a legacy of over 10 years of operating hundreds and hundreds of online services across the globe, and they've developed, interestingly enough, a framework for having conversations around trustworthy cloud computing. And if you're interested, I would suggest that you check out the Microsoft Trust Center, and there is a link to that at the end of this presentation. So I won't go into a lot of detail here, but I think it's important, to know that Microsoft is doing a lot on behalf of its customers to ensure that your data is safeguarded. And of course, Microsoft is committed to adhering to a very, very high standard in terms of the industry compliance certifications and attestations that they adhere to. And interestingly enough, though, when we boil it down, in the conversations that I'm having with my customers, the kinds of things that they ask about are still more or less the same. Will our data be secure? How do I protect against these advanced threats? And last but not least, how do I meet my compliance or my regulatory requirements? But the thing that I think that has really changed of late is that the perception that security is somewhat of a barrier to entry to the cloud is really going away. In fact, the opposite is now true more than ever, where customers are actually looking at the cloud and all the critical services that Microsoft can bring to bear, things like real-time monitoring and analytics and advanced authentication, identity and access management, as a way to actually improve security. And so now security in the cloud is a differentiator. It's not so much a barrier anymore. And so we see a lot of customers better understanding the possibility of what they can do on top of all the great things that Microsoft is doing behind the scenes to really ensure that their data is secured, is protected, and is compliant as well. The other thing that I think is really interesting is that a lot of cloud security providers, Microsoft in particular, are now starting to leverage big data in a way that is really adding to their ability to model and to monitor cybersecurity threats. And so this idea that it's not just about protecting anymore, it's really about making sure that incidences are audited and reviewed in real time, and so that we have a better understanding of who's using the services and when and how. And so when there is some type of utilization that's sort of outside of the norm, that can be identified in near real time. And so moving beyond sort of a perimeter-based line of defense and more towards, this real-time predictive model is, I think, again, another big advantage that Microsoft brings to the table in the security front. So you look at the suite of data control services that Microsoft's offering, very sophisticated and certainly very robust, lots of investment, and again, this is very much a shared model where Microsoft's doing a ton of things behind the scene to protect their data centers and prevent high-risk user activity across the network. But the services that they're now making available to their customer, I think, are really very advanced as well. More specifically, in terms of the conversation around SharePoint, lots of customers are still kind of working through their plans to migrate their large, investments in SharePoint on-prem to Office 365. We certainly want to be part of that conversation where appropriate, and I think that today's topic around how you protect that data within Office 365, how you can look to have DLP policies to secure, to help identify, monitor, and automate that automate the protection of that sensitive information is really key to that conversation. So, with that said, I want to now turn it over to Michael Trachtenberg, who's going to go a little bit deeper into the security stack and data loss prevention in SharePoint.
Yep, thanks, Duncan. And hi, good morning, everyone. Nice to talk to you all today. And So Duncan painted a pretty good picture of what are the benefits and the reasons and the purpose of going through the extensive lengths of implementing a very sound and solid DLP strategy around your data, right? So it's quite evident that organizations are going to be targeted, they're going to be hacked. This is an inevitability, but it's a matter of implementing multiple layers of protection for yourself so that in the event of some type of data breach or in the event of some type of compromised credentials, which is typically the cause of a data breach, that you are protected through other layers, right? And that's the main goal here, is to give yourselves multiple layers of security so you're not reliant on one single point of entry or one single facet of technology to protect you. So when we start to think about doing that, and we're building out this slide here, and we can build it out the whole way, is you're going to see when we take the approach of building multiple layers of security, there's a lot that we have to think about. There's a lot that we have to start to protect. And if we, looking at this particular slide, which is a purposeful eye chart, it's done on purpose here just to give you a sense of, these are all of the considerations when we want to put in multiple layers. And the middle tier here, where you see this little key, it says conditional access, right? So the first thing is giving access to our environment based upon a set of conditions, making sure that users are who they say they are, that they're authenticating from devices that we deem compliant with our organization or secure before they can gain access to our particular software or access to our IP or access to our particular content. So conditional-based access, application security based upon the specific app that people are accessing from, what content people are accessing. All of those things go into an overall strategy with securing your border, securing your perimeter, securing your content, and making sure that people are who they say they are. All of those layers are obviously very important, and they all provide a different service with regards to protecting your intellectual property. Because when we start to think about, what is it that you're really protecting, it's, you could be protecting your client's information, your customer's information. You could be protecting their sensitive data, your own sensitive data. But most important, you're protecting your intellectual property. The biggest thing that an organization could lose is their IP. Right? Because once you lose that, then anyone can do with what you do. So we can do all of this work to protect all of these layers and prevent people from accessing our IP through lots of different fashions. But unless we protect the IP itself, unless we protect the content itself, once someone gets in, they're still going to gain access to those things. So, so doing all of these layers is great, but the whole theory and the whole purpose behind data loss prevention is to protect the IP in the event that all of these other barriers start to break down, so that the content itself, that your IP itself, is protected. All right? Okay. So when we start to talk about, the idea of building up these layers of protection, the first example I like to start with is just protecting that front door, right? So this is users that are trying to maliciously or unmaliciously, right? Just every day, people that are connecting to your organization, right? When they are accessing email, opening up a library from SharePoint, looking at those documents. I mean, sometimes things are not malicious, right? Sometimes it's just a matter of a user. They have their iPhone. They're browsing, your SharePoint environment. They're downloading some things on that iPhone, and then maybe they lose it, right? Maybe they lost their iPhone, and they didn't do anything malicious whatsoever. They're a user. They're in your organization. They've multi-factored into your environment. Their device is compliant. They're accessing content in a fashion which you 100% support, and support them in their working effort to do that. But they lost their device afterwards, or they copied some content to a home machine in order to work on it later, and then somehow they got robbed, or something happened to, they lost their laptop. All of those things that don't have to initially be left be initially meant as malicious, they could end up with unforeseen circumstances where all of a sudden your intellectual property is out. So even if you go through this process of protecting the front door, where you've built up very secure, solid parameters around your borders, around your fence, and you have users connecting in a very secure fashion, does not necessarily mean that it's going to protect your content. So what do we need to do then? This is where we get into the idea of actually protecting the content itself. So irregardless of some type of perimeter breach that's malicious or unintentionally malicious, or users that are just that did something mistakenly, or content that found its way onto a drive or somewhere else. Obviously, all of those scenarios do happen. So once we get into actually protecting the data itself, it doesn't matter where the data moves after that. It could end up on a USB drive. It could be on someone's home machine. It can be on a rogue iPad or a rogue Chromebook or something like that. But it will not matter, because the content itself is protected. So when we're talking about DLP, right, and that's data loss prevention, we're actually talking about the loss of that data that has been protected. And really what this is just a strategy for your organization to be able to protect data, to be able to identify what data should be protected, to be able to track it as it moves, and to be able to make sure that your end users are confident in, even if they themselves make a mistake, that your IP is still secured and is still protected. All right, so this concept of DLP and protecting your data and encapsulating your data with protections is actually being built in across the entire Office 365 stack. So not even just SharePoint, and this does apply to SharePoint on-prem and SharePoint in the cloud. We're not going to really differentiate between those two here today, because all these controls can transverse both on-prem and cloud services. But what Microsoft is doing with their latest iteration of the Compliance Center is they're kind of wrapping together all of these different strategies for compliance, for auditing, for data loss prevention into one area, and they go across your Exchange environment, SharePoint, OneDrive, your Microsoft Office applications, so that you're not just doing DLP in a silo. It's not just a SharePoint thing that you're doing, although it does apply to SharePoint libraries and lists and SharePoint content, but it's going to also apply to OneDrive, and it's going to apply to everything else that's in Office 365 and all of your Exchange content. So now you can protect your intellectual property all across your entire Office 365 tenant with one set of policies from one location. So when we start to think about, well, okay, well, what can you really do with this, right? So now what you can do is through this one unified compliance center, you can build DLP policies, and these DLP policies can be pretty robust, right? You can build these DLP policies. You can set what actually constitute as a specific content that should be protected, and then you can have these policies enacted for data sets all across your Office 365 environment. This can go further by allowing these policies to automatically protect content, or you can be more strategic with how they get applied. These policies themselves, there are a tremendous amount that come out of the box with Office 365 now, or basically are pre-configured with certain rule sets. There's rule sets for DLP policies that specifically align to regulations that you might adhere to. So there's ones for HIPAA compliancy and FICA compliancy, and other ones for that are the FTC one that's listed there. So these DLP policies are have specific rule sets that will look at your content, whether if it's in a SharePoint library, let's say for instance, it will go through all of the documents in that library, and then it will essentially tag the specific pieces of content that meet that particular DLP policy. From there, it can actually take actionable steps to do things with that particular content, like encrypt it, or put advanced permissions on that content, or make it so that that content cannot leave your organization. And if it does leave your organization, it's encrypted and it is unreadable. So we can start with this idea of data classification based upon these pre-built DLP templates that are directly aligning to regulations that are existing. Now, Microsoft updates these templates all the time. So if the U.S. government makes some alteration to their policy, Microsoft in hand then is updating these templates for you. So they have a number of U.S.-based DLP policy templates, but obviously other countries, there's a tremendous amount there as well. Let's see, move this. So the templates are definitely very helpful in that classification process, right? So as we go through and classify the specific content, and we can mark these pieces of content based upon this rule set, and again, you can make your own rules as well. But once that piece of content has been marked, right? So let's say you're using the DLP template for anything that looks like a social security number, and it stamps a particular document saying that this document has a social security number in it, or something that looks like it. Well, after that, that content has been marked, and now we have analytics and metrics to go through and see where is that content being accessed, who's accessing it, where are they accessing it, are people trying to have that content move outside of our organization. So whether this is something that malicious or not malicious, or it's something unintentional from an end user, you can actually see that someone is accessing content that they shouldn't, or someone is accidentally sharing content that they shouldn't be, or you can also just tell, hey, we have content that has these DLP policies, and it's moving around outside of our organization. So you can see who's accessing it and when, and what DLP policy is applied to those contents that are being accessed outside of your organization. So all really powerful stuff with regards to actually seeing where your data is moving around to. So from that standpoint, all very useful. When we start to look at once the data has been classified into all of these different DLP strategies, what data is actually being marked at that point? How much classified data do we have in certain areas in our organization? So now with these DLP policies and this one centralized shop for your compliance center, you can actually go in and run reports and see, based all across your organization, you can search all of SharePoint or all of OneDrive and see where all of this particular data resides, which is, extremely useful because now you can say, oh, look, we have all of this data with people's social security numbers that is outside of the HR site collection or outside of the privy of the individuals that they're dealing with that specific content. So so obviously things that you've deemed as sensitive information, you can find that. You can also do more ad hoc type of searches and queries to be able to find sensitive data. There's obviously it's all being done in real time too, so it's going to show you across the board all of the statistics of which particular locations are the most prevalent for content that is protected or should be protected, or content that should be protected and is moved outside of location where it's supposed to be. Obviously, these reports are all exportable so that you can review them as well. All right, so when we get into the actual rules that are going to be identifying this data, some of them are customizable. Some you can write from scratch, but as we mentioned before, there's a whole host of them that Microsoft provides that are pre-canned expressions. So these ones, they're a combination of a query language and PowerShell, and they have a lot of, it's also like saying checksums and formatting. So if the idea is if something looks like a credit card number, it can find that. But if it's not exactly perfect to actually being a credit card number, it's still going to find that as well, right? So if it has something that is close to it, it's going to find it. This way, it doesn't have to meet that exact formula, right? With the 4 digits, space, 4 digits, space, 4 digits. It doesn't have to be exactly like that. It's still going to be able to extrapolate and find that because it uses a series of expressions in order to find those types of things. One of the cool parts about this too is that this indexing, so to speak, and this searching of all of your SharePoint data with these DLP templates, it's going to continuously do this, right? So you can apply these DLP policies to existing libraries, to new libraries, to as people are using OneDrive, which is an extension of SharePoint also, and they're uploading or accessing content from there, it's going to all flow from there as well. Now, when we first start to think about, how is DLP used in SharePoint and OneDrive and all of those complementary services, is when you first start off with this, it's really just to kind of start with that detection part, that first phase. And this is, yes, it's a journey. It's a journey for Microsoft, and it's a journey for an organization to start to use these tools effectively. So when we first start off, it's just about, let's just find out how much sensitive data we have internally before we could even begin to decide what happens with it, or how do we protect it, or which other rules we should put in place. It's a matter of internal discovery to say, let's put, this is all of our content that needs to be secured. Let's get DLP strategies around this, and then once we have that locked down, we can then start to make sure that we're monitoring it, protecting it properly, and educating our users on how they can use this content in a secure fashion. So that's a little bit of the phased approach, where first it's internal discovery, and then you get into protecting and monitoring and using more advanced analytics, and obviously some detective work if you need to, in the case of some type of leakage or some type of data gets outside of your organization. All right, so when we're first starting off with this, and we're kind of going through that discovery phase, right? That's where we're actually doing that protect portion, right? So this is where we've identified specific pieces of content through these DLP rules, and what happens at that point is we're going to encrypt that content, and then we're going to say who can access it, from where, and how. Now this part can get very, very granular. If you want to say that only people in HR could only read this particular pieces of content only from this document library. You can get that level of granular with it, right? That's all about defining what the access to that content looks like and for whom. Right? Once you get past that point where you actually have all of the DLP policies in place, you have the access control policies in place, which are just how people are accessing that encrypted content, you can then move forward with analyzing who's actually consuming that content, who's sending it to other people. So all of these things are more of that tracking and monitoring portion, which you can also give that power to the individuals creating that content. So let's say I'm working in a department where I work with outside vendors, and I want to share only certain content with them. I have the ability to, if it's been deemed possible to share out some DLP some content from our organization, share it with outside vendors, but only in a fashion in which I choose to have it sent to them. From there, I can actually track the vendor's usage of that particular piece of content. And if I want to lock down their ability to cut, copy, or paste into that, or not edit it, and it's view only, or it's view only and uneditable, I can control all of those things, and I can track what they're trying to do with that particular piece of content. All of these things are possible with the latest versions of Office 365, SharePoint Online, and also RMS technologies, which are part of this here. Because the DLP is and the DLP policies are kind of what does that classification process, but the actual encryption and the actual protection of the documents is all done through Azure RMS. One of the important things here, especially with this DLP enforcement and the idea of DLP enforcement, is the classification and labeling. So we mentioned before that you can create these DLP policies, you can apply them to libraries and locations, but really what's also happening on the back end, and we mentioned this before, is that the content is getting labeled, that it is kind of going through some type of analysis where these DLP policies are going into those documents, seeing if anything matches that particular set of criteria, and then it's stamping them. This is obviously a really great feature if you have a lot of legacy data, a lot of legacy content, and it's tough to retroactively go back and on an individual basis have users try to identify that something is or needs to be classified for protection. It's going to do it all automatically, and that's one of the new features of Microsoft's what they're calling Azure Information Protection. So Microsoft's latest offering under Azure Information Protection gives you the ability to retroactively go back and classify and stamp that historical data automatically without your users having to do anything for it. So definitely a really cool feature there. All right, so what does this actually look like for the end user? What does their experience look like when they're dealing with the content? And I think, before we kind of get into just some of the few things that they're showing here, the one thing to remember is that, people will typically do the right thing, right? So if someone is writing a document and they know it's going to be confidential and your organization has a policy for that, they'll save it in the right location. They'll put the correct security around it if they remember, right? And it's when you leave it all up to the user to remember to do these things, that's where it becomes a little bit more difficult for you to enforce good behavioral patterns for your end users. And it's not that they don't try. Again, they typically want to do the right thing, but it's just a matter of it's sometimes a user might not know, they might not identify, they forgot, or all these different scenarios. So now Microsoft has these policy tips with these little tooltips that actually give you the ability to prompt users when something inside the content that they're creating or opening or editing has something that meets one of your DLP policies. So now, as opposed to forcing them to remember or to know what your policy is for DLP, it's automatically going to happen as they're creating and consuming their content. So if a user goes into a a SharePoint library and they open up a Microsoft Word document and you have a DLP policy for anything in that library needs to be encrypted and protected and can't be shared out, when they open it up, they're going to see that right away. Or if they, for instance, started to enter in some type of information that would kick off a policy, it's going to notify them. It's going to give them these messages to telling them that there's sensitive information in here and this content now needs to be protected. So this is, taking a little bit of the uncertainty out of it and allowing your users to more freely just work the way that they want, and allowing the back-end processes that meet your DLP strategies to interject and give the user a much easier time. And also it kind of relaxes them a little bit because they don't have to worry that, oh, whatever am I writing, is it going to need to be encrypted? Is it going to need to fall under DLP? They have some reassurance knowing that if anything is detected that should be protected, it's going to pop up and let them know right away. So from the SharePoint side, and this can be, it can SharePoint, OneDrive, all of those things. If a user tries to upload a document, take a document out of out of a library, share it with someone else, any of those things, again, it's the same thing. We're putting controls in place now so that users can go about working the way that they want, and once they run into something that would basically trigger a DLP incident, it's just automatically going to do it for them, right? So just making it a lot easier from the end user perspective so that they don't have to think about, again, what is right, what's wrong. It's all part of the system, and essentially they can't mess it up. All right, so for SharePoint and OneDrive, what are a lot of those what are like the actual more nuts and bolts of the DLP feature sets? So as it currently stands right now, there's 51 with what they're calling sensitive information types, right? So these could be things like credit card numbers or social security numbers, or even date of birth if you want to you take it that far, which you could. These are preset numbers or preset items that Microsoft is always expanding on. So there's always going to be more. The automated policy enforcement, right? So that's like we talked about. If you have created a DLP policy and you want it automatically enacted for, OneDrive, for SharePoint, SharePoint Online, certain document libraries, certain locations in your organization, even file servers, you can do it too. So the automated policy enforcement. External sharing. So obviously, with these controls, you can again do things like saying this content is only for internal use only, or if it is external, it's a confidential and view only. So you have control over all of that. Blocking access to content. Blocking access to content just to external people. Again, it's all. These are not one or the others. All these things can be mixed and matched in order to build a very solid DLP strategy, but also a very robust one, so that you can be granular and have different strategies for different portions of your organization, or for different specific users that maybe have different workflow requirements. Right. So there's lots of different features and functionality there. Obviously, if you need to make some exceptions, you have the ability to do that as well. So we mentioned before too that when we first started off, and I guess when I first started, we laid out that whole big chart of like all these different ways that you can start to protect access and protect your environment and control who's actually getting in. But once they've actually, again, gained access, and you're going to start to implement protecting the actual content, so that if the content were to ever get out, that's protected. We're doing that now in SharePoint. We're doing that in Outlook. We're doing that in Exchange. We're doing it, across the board in all different areas of Office 365. And again, it's all brought together under one compliance center now too. So So there are other items within Exchange and Exchange Online, which things like making sure that the Exchange itself is applying to those same DLP rules, right? So aside from these DLP rules enforcing protection inside of just content that it resides on SharePoint document libraries or lists or wherever in SharePoint, it's also as people are sending emails, those same DLP policies are applying. So if I wanted to send an email to someone external to my organization, obviously the DLP policies can interject at the point of me sending that email as well. So email, this is up and running for SharePoint, OneDrive, any other form of communication, Skype for Business as well, and chatting. It's all part of that as well, and all of those DLP policies can take place in there too. Right. When it comes to the end user experience, they're also the pro tips and the as people are creating emails or creating or going to send out emails, those DLP policies with the tips are going to pop up at the same time, just like if they're creating the Word documents in SharePoint. All right, so the next area that I wanted to kind of touch on a little bit too is kind of going, taking a step back a little bit too, to say, okay, once we've looked at this very robust DLP strategy, and we've implemented all of these different templates, and we have all of our content protected, or good portions of our content protected. How do we take that a step further, even after we've protected our content? And that's where we have this. The Microsoft has the Enterprise Mobility Suite, but really it's just a combination of different products that working together to secure your content, and also to give you some actionable items that you can do in the event that your content has actually leaked, right? So where enterprise mobility and security come into play is this is a suite of products that help to secure the front door, as we talked about at first. They help to encrypt and protect your content with DLP strategies, and then it helps you to recover lost content or block content that has leaked that you've identified via your monitoring tools. So with looking at this chart, what the EMS components are is it gives you the ability to, when you're saying yes, protect the front doors, making sure that people are accessing your content, only the individuals that you say you want to access it, that if content is being accessed by others, you're alerted to that, right? And where you can use things like mobile device management to remove content from people's devices that it should not have ended up there. So in the case that you can actually do these things with this service where someone might have moved a particular piece of content that has a DLP policy on it onto their personal device. When they tried to open that from their personal device, Intune and the entire EMS suite can interject, realize that that content was intended for your organization only, and it can remotely remove and wipe that content from that remote source. So very powerful stuff with that regard. Also, if we bring the idea of Windows 10 into the mix, Windows 10 can actually take this a lot further, where Windows 10 can block the writing of that content onto its operating system altogether. It can remove it. It can give you in-depth reporting on who's accessing that content and how. There's a lot more to come in that regard too. Where EMS would also give you some more capabilities around that is, let's say you want to take it even further and you wanted to lock down that particular device that you're managing that has content on it that it shouldn't. You could lock down the device entirely or even remotely wipe the entire device. So granted, that it has to be Windows 10, you have to be managing it, but there are some use cases where if a particular laptop got compromised when it's one of your laptops and you've identified it had some protected content on it that would adhere to a DLP policy, you can remotely wipe that content and factory reset the device. So lots of tools at your disposal for working with your content, identifying that it's been leaked into a device it shouldn't have been, and then obviously rectifying that very quickly. Let's see what's next. All right. So one of the, I think, and we touched on this too briefly before, but this is obviously useful for when something is either unintentional or malicious, but it also can be used as a means to share content in a protected way with people outside your organization. And you can allow someone, one person to view, one person to edit, and basically give them access in a secured fashion the way that you want to do it. So if you have some content on SharePoint and you want to share it with one individual, internal, and they can edit, and one person external and they can't, you can allow all of those things to take place with a combination of all these features. And it could be just a matter of applying a DLP policy to a library and says anyone that's external view only, and anyone that's internal can edit, and you can have that actually all linked up to Active Directory groups to make it very easy for yourself. And if you're familiar enough with Microsoft's Cloud Azure Active Directory tendencies, you can do what's called a business-to-business or business-to-customer connection, so that you can manage other organizations' accounts' access to your content. And it gets very, very robust in what you can do with that. So you can identify a whole bunch of users that are maybe customers to you or another organization, and you can have them authenticate with their credential set that you've linked with your Azure Active Directory, and then they can authenticate that way. That's a whole other topic, right? A very large topic of conversation, but if you have questions, I'm happy to answer that later. All right, let's see next. So we're kind of gonna bring together these themes now, right? So the main idea for this, as far as Microsoft is concerned, is that these things are transparent to the end user, and they don't have to do much in order to use them properly, right? So that's their idea behind productivity first, is that the user can or cannot, yes, there's some education, but they can or cannot use it effectively, but yet the outcome is still going to be the same, right? It's still going to do exactly what it's supposed to do, whether they've necessarily done the right thing or not. And that's important, right? Because again, it could be malicious, it could not be malicious, but you know as the IT administrator that it's going to be protected and happen the right way. Right, built-in, site-wide. This is kind of across the board now for almost everything that's going to be in that overall compliance center, where everything inside of SharePoint and Office 365 is going to be managed in one centralized location. So when we start to look at SharePoint and OneDrive and all these desktop clients, that's where DLP is going to be extremely important, right? SharePoint, people are generating content, sharing content. OneDrive, people are downloading content onto devices. They're syncing content. They're accessing it from mobile fashions. The same thing for Skype for Business and Yammer. All of those things are on more of the right side from SharePoint on are content generating services. And when we have a content generating service, those are the ones that need the most amount of DLP to be enacted for, because that's where your content is being generated, right? So if we can, at that point, classify it, protect it, make sure that it is adhering to our policies, and that we're doing that in a fashion that's easy for the end users or transparent to them, and it's just going to work, then you can ensure that your content is protected. And then in our overall strategy for security, DLP is then operating at that phase 3 or that more high-tiered level. All right. All right, so I think right at this time we have about 10 minutes left, which is just about perfect where we want to land for a few minutes for Q&A. So if you have any questions, we're happy to stay on and to walk you through those. And, they could be anything DLP/SharePoint/Office 365 related, and happy to answer them for you.
Hey, Michael, thanks a lot. That was a great overview. I have a quick question to get us started.
Yeah, sure.
So I read a report recently that was basically suggesting that middle and upper management are among the worst offenders when it comes to inadvertently, unwittingly exposing sensitive data through either sharing to a Dropbox or keeping it on a unsecured thumb drive or something of that nature. One of the things that I saw last week at S4 that I thought was really cool was this whole notion of auto classification, where taking it a step further from the policy tips to actually classifying a document and applying some rule to that document based on whatever information that the corporate exec had sort of entered into that Word document. Let's say.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if you could speak to that or any other items on the roadmap that you could think might help to just make sure that there isn't this ongoing concern around people inadvertently letting things fall through the cracks.
Sure, and so I guess the first thing is, yes, that's accurate. Like the number one source of leaked confidential information is from upper or mid management, right? And part of it is they have more devices, right? So there's more points in which they can possibly lose something. They have more contacts. Typically, they're sharing more and they're building more business-to-business relationships. So that's just the nature of it. It's always going to be that way. Now, with that, for what you saw from that event is, yes, Microsoft is working hard to do the auto classification of content, and we touched on that briefly during this too. And I don't want to segregate that from the DLP policies, because those actually go hand in hand with that auto classification. And the way that it really works is you can say, here's these DLP policies. Is that we want to enact these 5, right? We want to enact social security numbers, credit card numbers, personal information, something for HIPAA compliancy, right? So we can enact those. And then as people are using Microsoft Word, as people are generating content, as people are using anything else inside the Microsoft ecosystem, based upon the DLP strategies that you want to target, then all the content that's being generated is automatically going to get classified. Right, so then that's where someone, creating a document, if they put something in there that looks like one of those DLP policies, it's going to give you those tooltips automatically. It's going to, recognize that, this specific set of data violating one of your policies. So the DLP policies go hand in hand with the automated classification, because that's what it's going to use to do that classification for you. Like I said, and the one thing that could help to ease the notion of, are these people, are people classifying the content properly? Well, they don't have to, right? It's just as long as you've turned these things on and you have these policies in place, as they're creating and generating content, it's going to notify end users that this content looks like it's going to be it's going to go against the policy, and it's going to give them the little pro tip in order to make that secure. Where Microsoft is going to take this steps further in the coming months, and this is more future looking, is to go through data at rest, to go through data inside your archives and retroactively apply policies based on classifications that you have now. So you can have 3, 4, 5, 10 terabytes of data in an archive system or an Office 365 mail archive, and it can retroactively go back and classify that data as well. That's something that's coming in the next few months with the Microsoft roadmap.
Cool.
Yep.
That sounds great. Lindsay, any other questions from the audience?
Nope, doesn't look like it. And I did unmute everyone if anyone wants to jump in. I know that's not a favorite, but feel free if you do have a question. Aside from that, feel free to email those questions to us if that's preferred. But no, I think we are set on the questions. Well done, guys. Duncan, did you want to do any quick overview of New SIG, or shall we end now?
So I just wanted to quickly call out some resources that I think might be of interest to people as they start to look more closely. First and foremost at Microsoft's positioning around how they're handling security and trust across the board. There is also the Transparency Hub, which Microsoft provides, which is a really interesting rundown of any notices from Microsoft around requests for access to information. So in the event that the feds or some other governing body taps Microsoft for access to some kind of data, again, they're very open and transparent about those, and you can see all the different criteria and when they would respond, and certainly the list of requests. There's also an interesting cybersecurity blog and some interesting articles in the news that I've added in here as well. And then last but not least, there is the Office 365 Security and Compliance Center, which is really that new place within Office 365 for taking advantage of some of these services like DLP and e-discovery and some of the other capabilities that Microsoft is rolling out. But the last thing I would just like to say quickly is that if you're looking at trying to further and deepen the conversation around security internally at your organization, and you would like to tap into some of our experts here at Signature or beyond, if you'd like us to bring Microsoft to the table, please feel free to reach out to me. We're more than happy to help that. It's a journey. We're here to help support you. So please, feel free to reach out to us when you're ready to do so.
Great. To wrap everything up, I just want to let everyone know again, you will receive a follow-up email from us with the recording in this session. Please let us know if there are questions, and keep an eye out for the other topics which are coming soon within this particular webinar series. Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. Please do reach out at info@newsignature.com if you have any of those questions or think of something post the webinar. Thank you and have a nice day.
Thanks, everyone. Bye for now.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.